So several months ago, we began a restructuring of the Pittsburgh Water and Sewer Authority. And the first issues that we looked to tackle was, number one, the customer service and the billing errors that had been plaguing the authority. And number two, the quality of our water. And the basic assumption with both was that we have had problems. They are a part of a aging infrastructure of an old steel town that is still here as we move into the 21st century. And there are two ways that we are going to do them. Number one is to be very upfront, honest, and transparent. And the second is to address them head on and to find common sense solutions to them. So we're here today to give an update on both the customer service billing and the infrastructure quality of the water within the city of Pittsburgh. And I'm proud to have our executive director, David Donahue, here to update you.
Thank you, Mayor, and good morning. So when I was happily retired in February, had I called the call center at the Pittsburgh Water and Sewer Authority, I would have waited an average of 5 minutes for someone to answer my call. And I might have been among the 12% of the callers who actually abandoned trying to get in touch with us. And the reason for that is a new combined remote meter system connected to a new billing system simply was not functioning properly, resulting in bills that were not accurate or bills that were estimated or bills that were not received on a timely basis. I'm happy to report that in June of this year, had I still been happily retired and made that call, my call waiting time would have been less than a minute, probably more like a half a minute on average, and only 2% of the callers would have given up, which is a standard rate for people who called the wrong number, want to be answered right away, or so on. So there's obviously been a major change over a period of time, and I want to report on some of the progress that we have made. But we are obviously a customer-based utility, and therefore being able to serve the customers and respond to them in a more timely basis is very important to us. Those of you who have been covering this know that I talk about the relationship of this remote metering system and the billing system as a marriage, and they simply didn't connect, probably due to a lack of sufficient planning when the system was put in. But a team that was assembled of employees as well as some consultants at the authority have been working to essentially do the planning that should have taken place before it was installed. And so we're running the system at the same time that we are making the changes to it. But we have come very close to marrying the two systems, including almost 100% installation of the remote meters at residential properties. We reconfigured our internal IT system so that we could run cycles in less than the 2 days it was taking. There are some 54 billing cycles in the city system. There are about 12 that are big, and it was taking as much as 2 days to run one cycle. So you can see you're almost through a whole month before that problem got solved. So we've gotten down to where a cycle can run in 1 day, and it allows us to make for a more timely billing, and obviously then reduces the volume of calls that we receive. We have had in April, May, and June 3 months of normal billing for our water and sewer customers, which means those cycles are, the calendars are being adhered to, and the bills are getting out on a timely basis, and the number of estimates have in fact dropped. We did discover during the process that meters connected to large commercial accounts could not be read by the remote meters that were purchased, so we have had to replace a number of meters. This is about 1,000 customers. We've replaced around 400. They're difficult to replace because we have to shut the water down in the business in order to replace them. So as you can imagine, that's difficult to coordinate. It has resulted in us dispatching personnel to read those meters, back to the future, if you will. But our customers are entitled to at least one actual meter reading a year, so we need to adhere to that. So we're trying to adapt to whatever problems or issues we have so that we serve the customers better. We've also assigned a specific staff to commercial accounts because many of our businesses, for example, hospitals, will have 20, 30 different meters, and some of them got confused during the installation of the remote meters, so all of that has to be straightened out. So we've responded to that group of customers as well. Some of you are familiar with the fact that we bill for the borough of Millvale. We've taken over their water system, and that was an instance where we had to stop billing for a period of time. We resurrected that, established a payment plan for those customers, and that billing started in May and has gone through 2 normal cycles so far. The most challenging issue is actually almost a completely separate problem. The Water and Sewer Authority bills customers in the South Hills area, sort of behind Mount Washington, if you can visualize that, for their sewer service only. We do not provide water to that area of the city. It is provided largely by the Pennsylvania American Water Company. And the authority, my authority, gets the readings from that organization in order to calculate basically people's Alcosan bills. We get the money and then we send it on to Alcosan. Because of a change at Pennsylvania American, that system broke apart, and we stopped billing that last year at various times. That has been the hardest problem to resurrect because we do not own the data that we need to create those bills. However, we've come up with a different consumption-based way of doing it. We have run through a series of tests, and I had set a June 30th deadline for our staff to deliver a system to me that was delivered on time. I have asked for some additional testing protocols before those bills are released, but I would expect early in July that those customers will be billed. It's important to note, because we have not billed them for a period of time, that these bills will include what's called a special payment arrangement, which is sort of a monthly installment. So if you owe less than $50 from the back billing, it will be billed at one time. But if you owe from $50 to $200, it will be divided into 3 installments. If you owe more than $200, it will be divided into 6 installments. We think this is the fairest way that we can approach this problem, obviously with apologies to those customers. We are also prepared, if customers cannot make the 6-month installment, to extend that upon their request. This is important. Obviously, the customers want to pay their bills, and you'll appreciate the fact that Pittsburghers are very attentive to their bills. Many people, even though they have not got bills, have called and said, well, just send me an estimated bill, or have walked in and asked to pay their bills. So we do have a number of credits on those accounts, but we need to get those bills out. I expect this will increase the volume of calls to us because there will be questions. We're trying to provide written information. We're doing robocalls to instruct the customers in the South Hills area. But we're also adding times to our call center to address any issues that come up as we release those bills. So all in all, there's been significant progress made. It's obviously borne out by the reduction in the calls. We have a council member who's on our board who told the board members at our public meeting the other day that the volume of calls to city council dramatically decreased during this time as well. So this is another indication that the system is getting back on board. I do not want to put the sign up mission accomplished, because it is not over yet. We are continuing to work. We have the South Hills issue. There are a few other customers that we serve that have not been billed in small areas outside the city. So those will be accomplished this summer. And I do expect the rescue team, as I call it, the folks who were gathered together and assembled to work on this, to continue to work probably through the end of this year. So they'll continue to work, and I'll be happily retired again and hoping to not read about this. To not read about this anymore. There are a couple of other things that we've looked at during this process about how to improve our customer relations. In June, the board of the authority approved the installation of a new customer call center management system, which will allow us to more quickly respond when calls come in, and to monitor calls so that we can make sure that the customers are being treated fairly and politely by our staff. And these are things that we cannot do now. So this is an important management tool, and this will be rolling out over the coming months. The other thing we're doing is we are looking, some of you may know there's a process when people get a water bill that they think is not correct. There's a board called the Exoneration Board that meets, and it's a process that requires customers to come down and sit for a hearing. So we're trying to make that a much more friendly process so customers do not have to actually physically come down and could even file written appeals and those sorts of things. So all of this is designed to obviously solve the problem that was created with this billing project, but also to address how a modern utility provides customer service. The mayor's also asked me to address our water quality initiative. In May of this year, I brought to the board of the authority a series of recommendations on addressing water quality issues. And the board authorized us to move forward on a number of them, and I have progress reports on those that I can share with you. And there's a handout on this, so what I'm going to say is it will be available in written form as well. The major focus of water quality in recent years has been on lead. Although there are many other issues in water quality. If you look at the drinking water quality report that we published June 1st, you'll see a whole series of tests that we and other water providers are required to make. But the focus has been on lead. And one of the things that I recommended, Pittsburgh is unique in that it offers free customer-requested lead testing services. Under the supervision of our team, folks are provided a sample bottle. They draw water from their home. They return it to us. It's sent to an independent lab, and a test is done. And when we get the results, we share them with the customer. That program has received slightly over 1,000 requests, 1,065. And of that, 454 have been returned. Not all customers go ahead and do the test once they receive the bottle. And just less than 400 of those have been tested, and these numbers are where we are. 225 of those tested are non-detect for lead, so that's 57% of those tested. I do want to emphasize that these are very random. These are simply customers who call us, so they could be from anywhere in the city. And then 72 are between 1 and 5 parts per billion, parts of lead per billion. 52 are between 5.1 and 9.9. 24 between 10 and 14.9, and then 20 are at or above 15 parts per billion. The importance of that particular number is that that is a standard which has been set by the EPA and therefore the DEP in Pennsylvania as requiring further action if you find those results system-wide. So we know through the voluntary testing that we have 20 properties that have tested above that, and those customers are then counseled about what they could do, which includes changing their lead service line, putting filters on their homes, flushing water, and so on. We are also required, as some of you know, to do what's called mandatory lead compliance testing, and that happens every 3 years, and we are in that 3-year cycle. We're actually doing those tests right now. Just to give you an idea of the history of this, if you go back to 2013, the last time tests were done, the result which is a complicated process to get to one number, which represents only one sample out of the number that you draw. But the number in 2013 was 14.8 parts per billion. And remember that 15 is the threshold. In 2010, the number was 10 parts per billion. That was the test result. In 2007, it was 9, and 2004, 9.5, and then in 2001, it was 6.0. So what you can see is that this number has been increasing. As the mayor said, the infrastructure in the city is getting older, so this number is increasing. But what the voluntary tests have informed us is that we know system-wide that this is not true in the whole system, and that the water leaving the plant is essentially free of lead. So this does happen in the service line area. And so that's where the problem needs to be addressed. So those are the results of our voluntary testing. I mentioned that we are currently doing the mandatory testing required every 3 years. And in that testing, we're required to pre-identify localities which we either know have a lead service line, or because of when they properties were built, we believe that they have a lead service line. These are called Tier 1. Some of you may have heard this term. You select Tier 1 properties. So we have been about the business for the last month of getting folks to volunteer to do this for us in Tier 1 properties. Those are being returned. We had still about 40 out this week, so we have been through a process to try and get all those done. They will now be sent to, again, an independent certified laboratory, and those results will be coming in, and I would expect to be able to report those results by mid-July. But regardless of what that result is, we believe, the board of the authority believe, that we should start taking steps, because even if we do not increase that number, there are, we know, at least from our voluntary test, 20 properties in the city who have exceeded the lead level. So we need to respond to that. So what are we doing? First, we are conducting what's called a corrosion control study. It's also called a pipe loop study. Okay, what does that mean? So this summer, we will be taking 5 lead pipes, which we have extracted from the system, and we will be running 5 different chemicals through those pipes in a controlled environment to determine if the chemical we are currently using, which is called soda ash, is in fact the best of the available anti-corrosion materials. We will also we will do test caustic soda, which the authority had been using last year for a period of time. We will also be testing 2 kinds of phosphates and a silicate, which is, all of these are accepted approaches to reducing corrosion, which is the goal in reducing lead levels. But you need to test to see which one works in your own system. They will work differently depending upon where you draw your water. We draw our water from the Allegheny River, but other providers here draw from the other rivers, and they may find success in different areas. So we expect, so as the result of this study, we will know whether what we're doing presently is the most effective thing we can do, or whether we need to change the mixture of chemicals that we do put in the water at the plant to try and prevent corrosion in the service lines. So this is a step that has not been taken in Pittsburgh, but we are starting down that road. We've also created a water quality advisory board, and we had a release on this with the names of the people. These are both academic specialists as well as some practical folks who we will be asking to advise us as we move down the road on what steps we can take to deal with water quality as an entire issue, not just lead. We have reorganized our utility and separated out the water quality from the water plant operation. So we will have an independent chief water quality officer. An acting director has been appointed to that, who will advise the board directly on water quality issues, as opposed to simply being a member of the staff of the water treatment plant. We've also adopted, the board has adopted a revised policy on lead service lines, and we have a demonstration project going on in Upper Lawrenceville. So on a series of streets in Lawrenceville, we are putting in new water mains all the way down several blocks of streets. In that process, we will be uncovering not only the street, but the sidewalk, and therefore the line leading into, these are basically row houses in Lawrenceville. When we find lead service lines, customers' lead service lines, we will advise them of that and suggest that they may want to consider replacing those service lines. And the reason for this will be the least expensive time for a customer to do that work. We will have done all of the uncovering work. If they simply have a plumber come and install the lead service line, we will then restore everything at the authority's cost. So this is a demonstration project. We have uncovered 60 properties so far, and actually only 20 show lead service lines. One might think in an area with older housing stock like this that it would be everyone, but that's not been the case so far. So that's why you just don't know in a city as diverse as this where you're going to find these various services. One of the things that I found that we do not have is an inventory of lead service. And so we have been searching through a number of paper records that we inherited from the city water department to see if we can develop an inventory so that we know exactly how many lead services there are. And so as we do projects, we can make the same kind of offer to the homeowners. I should tell you that it has been the authority's policy, even before this, if a customer said, well, I want to replace a lead service line, we will come in and work with them on accomplishing that. It is still their financial obligation, but the authority may replace its line at the same time, and so we work with customers on that. And finally, one of the things that the regulators do require is continuing customer education. And the authority has tried, particularly through its web services, to inform people about what lead means. We are not public health people, so we oftentimes connect them to agencies that do provide advice on that. But we also provide information on how our testing program is done, and we have posted all of the information which I have just described to you online so that customers have the opportunity to see it, to educate themselves, and to ask the necessary questions. So that essentially is a summary of the efforts that we are making, and I'd be happy to answer any questions on either of these areas.
Some customers believe that the lead service lines, the replacement of them should be the responsibility of the authority. Do you disagree?
Well, right, I can only tell you what the law is. In Pennsylvania, the Municipal Authorities Act, which governs the authority, does not permit us to work on private property. So these service lines are private property of the homeowner. Just like your gas line. If you're connected to a gas line, and I know this for a fact, when something happens with it, it is the customer's responsibility to essentially reconnect. So that is the state of the law as it exists right now.
Is 5% above 5% of the homes in this random testing or the voluntary testing above the allowable federal standards? Is that acceptable?
Well, they wouldn't count because we don't know whether they are lead service lines or not. When you do the mandatory...
As the director or the acting director, is that an acceptable... Are you satisfied? Are you happy with that number?
No, I tried to make the point that the reason I brought a series of recommendations to the board, particularly on testing the appropriate chemical reason, is because I think if you have one above that level, you really ought to say as a water provider, well, am I really doing my part here? Am I really doing what needs to be done? And what we do is provide the anti-corrosion chemical. And so we need to make sure that the one we're using is the most effective, and that's what we're doing. One of the things we do know is that I mentioned that phosphates would be one of the things we're testing. Phosphates are very effective in other water systems, so why don't we use it? Simple reason, we have an open reservoir. And phosphates will not work in an open reservoir situation. They create enormous algae, so you end up with a whole other problem in treating your water. So if phosphates become the most effective treatment for Pittsburgh, we're going to look at, all right, we're going to have an open reservoir. How are we going to introduce phosphates somewhere in the system after the reservoir? So that's the kind of thing we're looking at, but we know that that's a very effective treatment. It just hasn't been used here because of the other problems that it creates.
How many customers do you have in South Hills?
About 30,000. I think we have something like 26,000 accounts, but
And to replace a service line for the homeowner to do that, I know that the cost is going to vary, but what are we talking about here? Just if there's an average or typical in the city?
Right.
What is it?
Right. So in the project I mentioned in Upper Lawrenceville, the length from our line to the customer's home is very short because these are folks who don't have front yards. So basically their lines are right there. So it could be as little as several $100s for that work to be done, particularly because we have the whole thing uncovered. And a plumber would have to just go in and do the line. There would be other situations. You know, my home sits back from the street, so in my situation, it would be, you know, $1,000, could be more. It just depends on how much has to be dug up and that sort of thing. So it is a cost concern to everyone. I'm sorry.
How many lines are you replacing in Lawrenceville? You say there's a test project and you're replacing a number of your lines.
Well, we're replacing relays, water mains, and then every service line that we own will be replaced as well. And I don't have the number with me, but I can get you that number.
Dave, for the 20 customers who submitted for the random testing for the lead, where are those 20 that tested above the 15, and how high above 15 did they test?
Right. They're actually all over. Again, they tend to be concentrated in the East End. That seems to be where people have made the requests for testing more than any other part of the city. But it varies all around. I'm sorry, what was the second part of your question?
And how much above 15 are those testing at?
Oh, yeah. I think the highest I've heard of is 60, which is still not a high number, but it is high. I mean, if I got that number, I would take steps either to put a filter on my home or 60 parts per billion. 60 parts per billion. 60.
So for, again, you had said that for people who submitted the samples of voluntary testing, that you don't know yet if that's from the pipes in their homes or a line feeding their homes. Question then is, for those 20, do those random instances through the voluntary tests provide any sort of trigger for you, or it means that maybe we should test more people on that street or in that area to see if we get similar results?
Right. Well, we currently do the voluntary testing as it's requested by people because it's to help them make a decision that they need to make. But it's informing the authority at the same time. It's providing us data that we have really never had about the location of these and whether they're concentrated in areas. It's not really enough to draw conclusions. Enough people have not participated in this. But now we'll have mandatory testing. We're under a requirement to do the mandatory testing, not just now, but we have to do it again in December. This is an order of the DEP. So this is an area that is obviously receiving much more concentration. The good news is that all of this data will inform the authority about other steps that should be taken. One of the things, and I said in my May report, which is posted online to the board, is what we're doing now will not be the last action that is taken in this regard. I am pretty sure of that. But we need to develop more information and get more data, and as that comes in, I am sure the authority will address the issue with further actions down the road, either because the regulators change requirements or because, as we have done, the authority decides it's time to start moving on this.
Are there any mains that still have lead?
Well, the mains are largely not lead pipes. In fact, they're almost all not lead pipes. So that would not normally be the case. And that's why the draw is made at the tap rather than in the system. Now, we do test. A part of our testing procedure is to go out and usually it's done at commercial establishments, and takes samples that have not gone to residences to see if there's any contamination, which has not, and that it has not been found there. This appears to be, based on the data I've seen so far, largely a problem of service lines, because they are the things that are lead components.
You said that the effort to marry the two systems for the billing
Yeah.
is still ongoing. Have
Yeah.
you set any sort of deadline for yourselves for when this should be fixed?
Right. So I mentioned that the South Hills issue, I set the June 30th deadline. We're not quite there because of a decision I made to do additional testing on the system, but I think we're very, very close. Once that's done, basically, we're up and billing the system again. The reason there isn't another deadline is, as a result of all the work that's been done, we have learned of things that need fixed, changed, updated, and now the team will go back and do those, and that will be an ongoing effort. I would expect in the next 6 months that the team of outside folks will sort of finish their work for the authority, and we will institutionalize this process among our own staff, and then they'll just manage the system going forward. So.
And for the customers who received either exorbitant bills or were getting bills and now will have to be on a payment plan for bills that are much higher than they had planned for, who are obviously very upset, since you've acknowledged that this was a failure on your end, is there any sort of outreach to apologize to them?
Yes, I have. They'll get a letter from me in the first bill apologizing for this delay and the inconvenience that it has caused. And I can simply tell you I've worked my hardest to get this thing back up and going, but they certainly deserve an apology, no question.
Do you have an accounting system-wide of underpaid, overpaid, not billed customers?
Well, the billing system has all of that information.
Customers have been overpaying, not just in the South Hills, but all over.
Yeah, well, no customer in the South Hills has been overpaying because they've not been billed.
Right, but all over the city, if they've been,
Right.
the system, do they need to go down to the exoneration board and say, hey, I got these?
Right. Any customer who has a concern that their bill is not accurate first should contact our customer service unit so that it can be looked at and determined if there's any issue there. If they are then not satisfied with that and believe that they're being overcharged, the most common area for bills to be more than expected are water leaks. And that becomes an issue that only the exoneration board can resolve. So that is the system. But I am satisfied now that the metering system is connected well to the billing system, so that part should be working. But any customer who feels that it is not accurate needs to get in touch with us.
Even going back, like the last?
If they have some back claim, we would look at that, certainly. There were, during this process, considerable amount of adjustments made because it was clear that folks, there were instances where folks were not billed correctly. I'm a water customer. I live in the 10th Ward. I've never had an issue. There are many, many thousands of others who did not. But obviously the ones who there were issues with, it's one too many. So we've been trying to deal with that and make adjustments, and the Exoneration Board has had to hold extra meetings during this time to deal with customers, so all that has been ongoing.
The individual voluntary lead testing, how do customers tap into that?
Right, so they get in touch with us or file a request, and then our staff follows up and arranges a time to deliver the bottle and with the instructions about how to do the test. It's very specific instructions. We've done some demonstrations on this, but we don't want people to run their water for long periods of time. We want to first draw a sample. That's the most accurate. We need them to refrigerate it after they take it until it's picked up. There are a number of things that have to do. So we do depend on the customer to help us with this. And then we pick the sample up, and then the process moves forward as I described it.
David, you said you've gotten 1,065 requests for lead testing. Could you go to those numbers? I saw 454 tests have been done, is that right?
We had 454 returned. So obviously a lot of people ask for a bottle and then they don't get the test done right away or forget about it. I'm not sure what the reason is. And then of those 454, at the time this report was done, we had run 393 through the lab.
390.
Right. These results, I have these on a handout, so this is all written down for you. Anything else?
Does your handout also give the level of lead that are in there?
Yes, all those numbers are on the handout, correct.
In terms of commercial testing, is that on your handout?
We don't do commercial testing.
Commercial customers, you said there were about 1,000 commercial.
What I said, I was talking about the billing system.
That there were about, that the system can't read the meters for large commercial customers. You have about 1,000 customers, replaced about 400 meters.
That's correct.
How many meters overall have to be replaced?
So we have about 600 left to do. And those are the ones where we've had to actually go and read them because we're not getting readings electronically, so we've actually dispatched staff to go and read those meters.
Did you have to replace residential meters also?
The indoor meters, in some cases, but mostly not. It was a replacement of the outdoor, what's called remote reading device, also goes by the term MXU. And so the authority, as part of this process, they had remote readers for some time. It was a gray box outside your house. Then they changed them all to sort of a beige colored box outside of your house. And that was replaced because the wiring to the indoor meter basically worked with the new remote devices. So those didn't have to be replaced.
Have you calculated the cost of all these initiatives you've enacted for the authority?
Right. Well, in terms of the billing system, I know that most of the out-of-pocket costs has been professional services for people we have added to the billing section. And we have temporary people all the time, but through May, the budget for professional services in that area is, we've exceeded it by $200,000. So that's really the out-of-pocket cost for that right now. I really don't have a cost on the testing. This is something we do all the time, so it's more or less built into the budgets of the authority. We will be developing budgets for the new water quality division. That budget will be set up for 2017. So a lot of this is focus change, not more people. It's focus change. What are you doing? How are you doing it? What can you do better? So there isn't necessarily out-of-pocket costs associated with it.
How about the, one last one, the water quality officer? You hire somebody?
We have an acting person. This was the person who had formerly been in charge of both the plant and the laboratory. She's a scientist, so I have given her sole responsibility, taken the plant responsibility away, and designated her as the acting director. We are actually recruiting and will be interviewing people for that position.
For the salary for that job?
Correct. I mean, I can give you a job description and that sort of thing, but we haven't made an appointment, a final appointment. But the person who has extensive experience and has been through these testing modules many times is the acting
Last question?
director.
The issue that you had about the meters for the commercial customers not being able to be read remotely, is that a flaw in the meters? Is that a recoverable cost from the manufacturer? Or is that simply a system compatibility that the
Right.
issue?
Right. It's just a compatibility issue that wasn't examined before they did all of this. They might have been able to do something different, but not all of these remote devices read every meter that's in existence. Pittsburgh has a wonderful gift of having at least, I think it's 7 different kinds of meters through the system. So in buying the remote devices, you tried to find one that was compatible with all of them, and in this particular case, it was discovered that it wasn't. So it is a compatibility problem.
Okay, thanks, everybody.
Just real quick too, and Director, what was the number in 2001 when we did the mandatory testing?
6 parts per billion.
And in 2013?
14.8 parts per billion.
That should have raised a red flag. When you go from 6 to 14.8 on mandatory testing in a 12-year period, and you know that 15 is the EPA guideline, we should have been having this press conference back then. I want to thank you for the work that you've done on not only clearing up the billing process, but also the training of the people who are answering the phones as well. A lot of people were going through a rough situation and weren't being treated politely, and that's also a critical part of this. Secondly, the situation with the meters should never have occurred. That should have been something that was done as the meters were being installed. The system should have been tested before they were installed to make sure they work. We basically had to go through and redo an entire system in the matter of months. And we'll get there by the end of the year. And I also want to thank you for that. There was a recent national report that came out that said over 5,000 water systems in this country are not in compliance when it comes to lead. Over 5,000. Now, some of that may be due to testing and how they test, but the fact of the matter is we have to be proactive. Although we understand that a lot of the problem doesn't exist within the main lines, but within the service lines that are the property of a homeowner. The same way that a sidewalk is your property, a driveway is your property, your gas line to your home is your property, your water line to your house is your property. If we find this to be problematic, we have to work together. We can save costs if we do so, and help people to get through that situation to guarantee that that potential problem can be resolved. This is what happens when you have an older city. And that number of 5,000 will probably go up, not down, as we continue to cut, not increase spending from Washington and Harrisburg into our infrastructure. So there's a lot of challenges. The goal of today is not to hide from them, but to address them directly. Even before the study is done with mandatory testing, we want the public to be aware of what we're seeing, and then be able to take it on head on and come up with common sense solutions. Thanks, everybody.